world believed Russia's military was unstoppable. NATO war games once warned that if Moscow launched a full invasion in Eastern Europe, frontline states could be overrun in days. Western analysts, looking at Russia's campaigns in Georgia and Syria, described its forces as modernized, coordinated, and overwhelmingly powerful. But when Russia crossed into Ukraine in February 2022, something happened that many people did not expect. The myth began to shatter in real time. Because instead of collapsing, Ukraine fought back. Not with bigger numbers or a more advanced arsenal, but with something Russia did not plan for: adaptability, intelligence, Western support, and a level of national resilience that surprised even some of Ukraine's own partners. Over months and then years, Russia's reputation as a near-peer military giant began to unravel, not in a single moment, but piece by piece. To understand how that happened, you have to follow the war from the very beginning. From the failed blitz on Kyiv, to the struggle for air superiority, to the drone revolution, to the humiliation of the Black Sea Fleet. What unfolded in Ukraine has already reshaped modern military thinking. A force many assumed was one of the world's most formidable has been forced to confront the limits of its own capabilities. And it all began with a plan built on the assumption that Ukraine would not fight for long. Before 2022, Russia was widely described as the world's second strongest conventional military. That perception was not invented from nothing. It came from years of operations where Moscow seemed to project force with confidence. The rapid seizure of Crimea in 2014 created the belief that Russian hybrid warfare was efficient and hard to counter. Russia's intervention in Syria showcased cruise missiles, modern aircraft, and coordinated operations that looked, from the outside, like a rebuilt expeditionary force. This was reflected in Western planning. NATO reports and pre-war war games frequently assumed that Russia could overwhelm frontline NATO states in the opening phase of a conflict, unless the United States and other major allies intervened quickly. Several studies published before 2022 warned that Russia's massed armor, artillery, and air power could push deep into Eastern Europe if left unchecked. Ukraine, by contrast, was often underestimated. It had fewer resources, less modern equipment, and was still trying to move beyond Soviet-era doctrine. Yet as institutions like RUSI and the Institute for the Study of War later pointed out, the image of Russian strength rested heavily on operations where Russia chose the timing, enjoyed escalation control, or fought weaker opponents. Ukraine was something very different. A large industrialized country with a motivated population, reforming armed forces, and 8 years of combat experience against Russian-backed separatists after 2014. Russia did modernize parts of its army after the 2008 war in Georgia. It created elite airborne and special forces units, bought new armor, practiced long-range precision strike, and invested heavily in strategic messaging around its new equipment. The myth of Russian military power had roots, but myths tend to survive only as long as they are not fully tested. In early 2022, Russia finally launched the war that would put its reputation to the hardest test it had faced since the end of the Cold War. Russia's opening concept was a lightning victory. Western intelligence later described Moscow's initial objective as a rapid push to Kyiv and a forced regime change within days. Documents and testimony collected after the first weeks of fighting indicated that some Russian units had even brought parade uniforms, expecting to be part of a victory march in the Ukrainian capital. The first military moves reflected that overconfidence. Armored columns advanced from Belarus towards Kyiv. Airborne troops assaulted Hostomel Airport, aiming to create an air bridge for follow-up forces. Special units tried to infiltrate the city. Long convoys stretched down highways, assuming limited resistance. On paper, it looked like a fast decapitation strategy. Ukrainian resistance did not collapse. Instead, Ukrainian forces used a mix of prepared defenses, ambush tactics, and local initiative to blunt the advance. According to later Western briefings and open-source analysis, Ukrainian units destroyed bridges, targeted lead and rear vehicles and convoys, and used anti-tank systems like Javelin, NLAW, and the domestic Stugna P to hit Russian armor that had outrun its support. RUSI analysts eventually concluded that the Russian battalion tactical group model, seen as a core strength before the war, suffered from serious flaws. Many units had too little infantry, poor coordination between elements, and weak reconnaissance, making them vulnerable to exactly this kind of resistance. At Hostomel Airport, Russian airborne units ran into far more resistance than expected. Instead of a quick seizure, the airfield became a contested battlefield. Ukrainian artillery and airstrikes disrupted Russian efforts to reinforce by air. Western officials later assessed that Russia lost a meaningful number of elite paratroopers in the first days, weakening its ability to sustain pressure on Kyiv. Then there was the now famous convoy north of the capital. Satellite imagery showed a long line of vehicles stalled for days. Not because Ukraine stopped every truck with direct fire, but because of fuel problems, mechanical breakdowns, traffic jams, and repeated Ukrainian strikes on key points. This convoy became a symbol of Russian logistical and organizational problems. Post-war studies by Western defense institutions highlighted the lack of planning for a prolonged high-intensity campaign across multiple axes. By early April 2022, Russia had withdrawn from Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy. What was supposed to be a swift operation to topple the Ukrainian government had turned into a costly failure. The image of an unstoppable Russian army had been badly dented in the very first phase of the war. But this was only the beginning, because the next stages of the conflict would show that these setbacks were not isolated mistakes, but signs of deeper structural weaknesses. Before the invasion, many experts expected Russia to secure air superiority quickly. Moscow fielded a large fleet of modern aircraft, precision-guided weapons, and extensive experience using air power in Syria. Several Western assessments suggested that Ukraine's smaller, older air force would not be able to contest the skies for long. That is not how events unfolded. Russia achieved local air advantages in some areas, but according to statements from US and European defense officials, it never secured sustained theater-wide air superiority. Ukrainian aircraft continued flying sorties. Ukrainian air defense systems, both Soviet-era and later Western supplied, continued to pose a real threat. Ukraine's approach to air defense was flexible. Its air force dispersed aircraft, used alternate runways, and kept shifting locations to avoid destruction on the ground. Ground-based air defense units employed shoot-and-scoot tactics, regularly moving their systems after firing. Ukrainian crews used systems such as S-300 and Buk, and later integrated Western systems including Iris-T and NASAMS to create a shifting air defense network that Russia struggled to predict. Russia did attempt to suppress these defenses. It fired large numbers of cruise and ballistic missiles and used specialized aircraft. But Ukrainian tactics, combined with deception and decoys, blunted many of these efforts. Western officials later stated publicly that real-time intelligence support helped Ukraine anticipate some strikes, while open reporting from Ukraine showed examples of fake radar and air defense positions used to draw Russian fire away from critical assets. Unable to fully clear the skies, Russia relied increasingly on standoff missiles, guided bombs, and drones to strike Ukrainian targets. Ukraine, in turn, built up layered air defenses to intercept as many of these as possible. Over time, Ukrainian reports, corroborated by Western military statements, showed interception rates for some waves of cruise missiles and drones that significantly reduced the impact of Russia's long-range strikes, even if some still got through with deadly effect. The result was an air war that did not match pre-war assumptions. Rather than dominating from above, Russia had to operate cautiously. Its aircraft often stayed at longer ranges to avoid Ukrainian missiles. That limited the precision and effectiveness of their strikes and reduced their ability to provide close support to ground forces. The battle for the skies revealed an important reality. Russia's air power was dangerous and destructive, but it could be contested by a determined, adaptive defender with a mixture of legacy systems, new Western technology, and strong external intelligence support. If there is one area where Ukraine fundamentally changed modern warfare, it is the use of drones. From the first months of the invasion, drones became central to how Ukraine fought. It started with systems like the Bayraktar TB2, which gained global attention after footage showed them destroying Russian vehicles, artillery, and air defense systems. These videos were analyzed by independent researchers and defense institutes, confirming that TB2s had been used effectively in both reconnaissance and strike roles, even against a theoretically stronger opponent. As the war continued, drone use expanded dramatically. Ukraine did not limit itself to military-grade systems. It adapted commercial quadcopters to drop small munitions on troops, vehicles, and trenches. Volunteer groups and private companies worked with the military to scale up production of first-person view drones that could be flown directly into targets. Ukrainian officials spoke openly about the growth of a domestic drone industry focused on both reconnaissance and long-range strike. By 2023 and into 2024, Ukraine had built what many analysts described as a drone ecosystem. Reconnaissance drones at every level of command, FPV attack drones used like guided missiles at short range, medium-range systems supporting artillery, and long-range one-way drones capable of reaching air bases and infrastructure inside Russia. Russia responded with its own drones and invested heavily in electronic warfare. It also deployed Shahed-type loitering munitions supplied by Iran to attack Ukrainian cities and power grids. But even as both sides used drones, Ukraine's integration of unmanned systems into artillery, infantry, and special forces tactics was often highlighted by Western analysts as particularly innovative. For Russia's armored and mechanized units, this new reality was brutal. Columns that might once have advanced with relative secrecy were now visible to small drones flying overhead. Artillery, guided by live video, became more accurate. The cost equation flipped. Cheap drones costing hundreds or thousands of dollars were contributing to the destruction or disabling of vehicles worth millions. The drone revolution did not make Ukraine invincible. Russian forces adapted in some areas, improving camouflage, dispersal, and electronic jamming. But the broader pattern was clear. Ukraine turned drones into a force multiplier that helped close the gap between its armed forces and Russia's larger, more heavily equipped military. And in doing so, it cracked another part of the myth of Russian battlefield dominance. After the failure around Kyiv, Russia shifted its focus to eastern and southern Ukraine. The aim was to capture territory in the Donbass, secure land routes to Crimea, and pressure Ukrainian defenses through heavy, sustained attacks. Russia did make gains. Cities such as Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and later Bakhmut fell after long, costly battles. Ukrainian officials acknowledged painful losses in manpower and equipment. But even as Russia advanced, the price it paid drew attention across the world. Western governments regularly published estimates of Russian casualties and equipment losses. While exact numbers are debated and both sides have an incentive to shape narratives, there is broad agreement among independent analysts that Russia's offensives came at a very high cost in lives and materiel, especially in operations where poorly trained mobilized troops were used in frontal assaults. Ukraine, for its part, used Western-supplied systems like HIMARS to attack Russian ammunition depots, command posts, and bridges deep behind the front. Defense ministries in the United States and Europe publicly confirmed the impact of these strikes. Video evidence and satellite imagery showed large secondary explosions and damaged logistics hubs. This forced Russia to move its supplies further from the front line, complicating resupply. The Kharkiv counteroffensive in late summer 2022 marked one of the most dramatic shifts on the ground. Ukrainian forces exploited weakly held sections of the line, recapturing large areas faster than many observers expected. Russian units left behind vehicles and equipment in their haste to withdraw. The Institute for the Study of War and other organizations described this operation as a clear sign of Russian overstretch and Ukrainian operational creativity. Later, under sustained Ukrainian pressure, Russia withdrew from the city of Kherson on the right bank of the Dnipro River. This was the only regional capital Russia captured after February 2022. Its loss was both strategically and symbolically significant. By 2024 and 2025, the front lines remained fluid and fiercely contested. Russia adapted by entrenching, building extensive defensive lines, and focusing on attritional attacks in some sectors. Ukraine continued to launch counterattacks and deep strikes. Neither side achieved a decisive breakthrough, but the idea that Russia could simply roll across Ukraine by weight of numbers alone had clearly been disproven. The ground war revealed a Russian military capable of persistence and brutal attrition, but also constrained by logistics, command issues, and a slower learning curve than its opponent. For years, the Black Sea Fleet was portrayed as one of Russia's key instruments of regional power. It helped enforce the annexation of Crimea and supported operations in Syria. Its base at Sevastopol was considered heavily defended with layered air and coastal defenses. The sinking of the cruiser Moskva in April 2022 was the first major blow to that image. Ukraine said it struck the flagship with domestically produced Neptune anti-ship missiles. Western officials later stated they believed a Ukrainian missile strike was the likely cause, though Russia attributed the loss to an onboard fire and subsequent explosion. Regardless of which version anyone emphasized, the result was the same. The fleet's flagship was lost in wartime, and that alone had enormous symbolic and operational impact. Over the next 2 years, Ukraine steadily increased pressure on Russian naval assets. It used TB-2 drones, coastal defense missiles, and later explosive naval drones to attack ships near Snake Island, in Crimean waters, and around Sevastopol. Many of these attacks were documented in footage released by Ukraine and verified by open-source analysts. The introduction of long-range cruise missiles, such as Storm Shadow and its French counterpart Scalp EG, further changed the equation. British and French officials confirmed that these missiles had been supplied to Ukraine and publicly stated that their range exceeded 250 kilometers. That range placed key naval infrastructure in Crimea within reach of Ukrainian aircraft. In September 2023, a major strike hit the Sevastopol shipyard. Satellite images widely analyzed by independent defense experts showed significant damage to a dry dock, a large landing ship, and a Kilo-class submarine that had previously been used to launch Caliber missiles. Several research groups assessed that the submarine was likely out of service for the foreseeable future. Shortly afterwards, a missile strike hit the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet itself. Footage and images confirmed by international media showed the central building badly damaged and smoke rising across the city. Russia later acknowledged that personnel had been killed. Under this growing pressure, Russian naval operations changed. Western defense ministries reported that many larger vessels had been moved from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk, farther inside Russian territory. Meanwhile, Ukraine gradually reopened grain export routes along the western Black Sea, relying on a mix of diplomatic pressure, coastal defenses, and the threat of further strikes on Russian ships that came too close. Russia continued to fire cruise missiles from ships and submarines, and its navy remained a threat. But the aura of a dominant Black Sea fleet operating with impunity was gone. Ukraine had proven that even heavily defended ports and high-value ships could be targeted and damaged, especially when an attacker combined domestic ingenuity, Western-supplied weapons, and detailed intelligence. Russia's invasion was meant, in part, to pressure NATO and limit its expansion. Instead, it has triggered some of the most significant changes inside the alliance since the end of the Cold War. Finland joined, bringing a highly trained military, strong artillery, and extensive experience planning for a possible conflict with Russia. Sweden followed, adding advanced air and naval capabilities and solidifying NATO's presence around the Baltic Sea. Alliance members increased defense spending, with countries like Poland, the Baltic states, the United Kingdom, and others planning major procurement programs and force expansions. Ukraine is not a NATO member, but its battlefield performance has influenced NATO's thinking on deterrence and defense. The message is clear: a determined defender with strong international support and the ability to innovate can resist and blunt aggression from a larger neighbor. Even if there were a ceasefire tomorrow, the Russian military would not simply snap back to its pre-2022 state. Western intelligence assessments and independent think tanks have noted that Russia has lost large quantities of equipment, from tanks and armored vehicles to artillery, aircraft, and ships. It has also taken heavy casualties, including among units that were considered relatively well-trained before the war. Replacing experienced personnel and advanced systems under sanctions, export controls, and economic pressure will be a slow process. Russia has adapted in some ways. It has increased domestic production of ammunition and armor, dug extensive defensive lines, and shifted to more attritional tactics in certain sectors. Its forces still pose a serious threat, particularly to Ukraine and neighboring countries. But the aura of near automatic dominance that surrounded its conventional forces before 2022 has diminished. The world has seen the failures as well as the strengths. It watched Russian columns stalled for lack of fuel. It watched Ukrainian forces push Russian troops back from Kyiv and Kharkiv. It watched warships damaged in their own ports. It watched as Russia turned to older equipment from storage and to external suppliers for drones and munitions. Reputation in international security is not only about what a country owns, it is about what it can actually achieve on the battlefield. Ukraine has shown that Russia's military, while still dangerous, is far from infallible and has serious structural weaknesses when forced into a long, high-intensity war against a prepared opponent. Ukraine broke the myth of Russian military power not by being stronger on paper, but by refusing to play the role Moscow had written for it. The war is not over. Russia continues to attack. Ukraine continues to defend and counterattack. The situation on the ground remains violent and uncertain, but one truth has already emerged. The old image of Russian conventional power as an almost unstoppable force has been replaced by a more complex, more realistic picture. A picture in which a large military can still be blunted, damaged, and pushed back by a smaller country that prepares well, fights intelligently, and is supported by committed allies. Power is not what a state claims in a parade or on television. Power is what it can hold, protect, and achieve when everything is at stake. This video is based on publicly available reports, official statements, and independent analysis, and is intended for educational and informational purposes only.